I just don't understand why you would go to such a person's house, given how strenuously you've always denied, accusations against you. Why would you do this? And he said, that Jeffrey Epstein had said to him it had been an unfair accusation. He'd been framed, that this girl's boyfriend had tried to extort him and he refused, tried to extort Epstein and Epstein refused. And as a result, he went to prison. But the truth was, he couldn't really explain it. He just said there were interesting people there and I wanted to go.
Hadley, a lot of the focus in this country in recent days has, of course, been on Peter Mandelson and the pressure on Keir Starmer. But the release of the Epstein files has shown us just how many rich and powerful men had links to Epstein as well, not just from the world of business, but leading academics, think tankers, thinkers, and people including stars, including Woody Allen and Noam Chomsky. You spoke to Woody Allen last year and you asked him directly about Epstein. What did he say?
I did. So I'd gone to New York in August to interview him about his new novel. And some readers out there might know that I have written a lot about Woody Allen over the past decade, and particularly the accusation that Mia Farrow made that he had molested their adopted daughter in the 90s, Dylan. And I'd gone, written about this and pointed out that there was very little evidence and that he'd been fully cleared by 2 investigations. So
the daughter has repeated the allegations, hasn't she?
Yeah. Yeah, so she has spoken up I think it was in 2014, she first spoke publicly about it, Dylan. And so I've, talked a lot about Woody and, the unfair accusations against him. And I land in New York, and the next day there's a piece on the front of the New York Times saying that there was a letter from Woody in this birthday book to Jeffrey Epstein, which I think was dated 2005. It also had a letter, I believe, from Peter Mandelson and lots of other people saying, and Woody said that how much he enjoyed having dinner at Epstein's house, although Epstein's house was quite creepy. And if I remember correctly, he compared him to Dracula and talked about how he always brought his wife Sun Yi to these dinners, and Sun Yi had taught Jeffrey Epstein how to have a dinner party, et cetera, et cetera. And so I go to Woody's house to talk about the book, but also obviously to ask about the Epstein stuff. And at first he was okay talking about it and said, well, Jeffrey had been his neighbor. They lived, like 2 doors away from each other. And he'd been invited to Jeffrey's house in I think it was 2011, for this big dinner that the PR Peggy Siegel had organized at Epstein's house for Prince Andrew. And Sun Yi had wanted to go to this dinner because she wanted to meet a British royal. And also at this dinner were various American journalists, including Katie Couric, George Stephanopoulos, Chelsea Handler. None of them, Woody didn't cite any of them. He said he didn't want to name any names, but those people have all spoken up. And he said after that, Jeffrey would invite us over for dinner. There were always interesting people there. There were professors from MIT, professors from Arizona, and they would be talking about things like how to stop the aging process. He said he went to a dinner that was just for magicians, and Woody had started out as a teenager as a magician. So he said, I was really interested in that. David Copperfield was there. And I talked to him a lot about this. I said, Woody, this was after he'd been in prison for sleeping with an underage woman, for having sex with an underage woman. I just don't understand why you would go to such a person's house, given how strenuously you've always denied, accusations against you. Why would you do this? And he said, that Jeffrey Epstein had said to him it had been an unfair accusation. He'd been framed, that this girl's boyfriend had tried to extort him and he refused, tried to extort Epstein and Epstein refused. And as a result, he went to prison. But the truth was, he couldn't really explain it. He just said there were interesting people there and I wanted to go, which completely bewildered me, because it was like, interesting people would come to your house, Woody. Like, you don't need to have this in between
thing.
But
isn't there something sort of, I don't know, huge kind of lurking there, which is that a lot of these men, quite a few of these men, probably thought if my life were looked at under a certain light, I could be accused of terrible things. Thus, my good friend Jeffrey has been accused of terrible things. Yeah. And if I believe he's guilty, then I'm believing myself to be guilty. Whereas actually another way of looking at this is they've all just been behaving disgracefully.
Well, I think, I'm not going to speak for Woody Allen here, but I think what he thought was, I was unfairly accused. therefore other people who have been accused have been so unfairly. And I find this a lot with people who have been canceled, whether it's journalists or not. They suddenly ally themselves with people who are extremely dodgy, and therefore they themselves are proving what their critics say about them. And I've been through a cancellation, and I've been very cautious about not doing that, thinking, well, if the left canceled me, everyone who's canceled by the left is therefore fine. Like, that's not
Yeah,
true.
yeah, I know.
And I think also, yeah, I think that a lot of these men had real blind spots. And there have been emails that have come out in the files that are actually all sent by Sun Yi with Jeffrey Epstein. That, like Sam said, if anyone went through our emails, fine, they'd find some dodgy stuff. There's Sun Yi saying that the Me Too movement had gone too far. And obviously everyone leaps on that because that sounds completely dreadful from, a Woody Allen, relative with Jeffrey Epstein. Does it prove criminality? No, but it definitely proves some moral blind spots there. And, personally for me, I think anyone who was still hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been in prison, like, you really have to look to yourself, like, what were you getting from this? Because to me, that is just a red line.
Well, look, there's obviously going to be plenty more in this story throughout the day on Times Radio. Jo Coburn's presenting the Times at 1. She'll be speaking to a lawyer representing some of Epstein's victims, so you won't want to miss that. Hadley, while I've got you, let's talk about this court case that social media companies are facing in Los Angeles this week, in which they're accused of being addictive by design. I wrote about this myself just last week, or perhaps the week before. A jury is going to decide whether firms like Meta and TikTok were negligent by trying to encourage people to spend more time on their platforms. This seems to me to be a new focus. We talked a lot about harmful content online, but the fact that they're addictive by design, that claim, the fact that could be a harm in itself, this is a new assault on the tech companies. It may be more successful.
Yes, although I have more qualms about this. Like, I'm very anti phones for children. I'm on all the smartphone free childhood groups at all of my children's schools, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, they're addictive by design. I don't think that's necessarily a crime. I mean, a lot of things are addictive by design, so are sweets, and it's up to us as adults to not, to have restraint. The question is, are they aiming at children and aiming to get the children addicted by design? That's a slightly different issue. And I think that is something that's interesting in the court case. But I think, Meta and, all these companies are going to say, well, it was up to the parents to stop the children. At what point did parents understand how dangerous these apps are for their children is a different issue. But given that the adults are all on these apps too, it is ultimately, yes, fine, there should be more safeguarding from these tech companies, but it is ultimately up to the parents to control what their children are looking at.
Yeah, but I mean, if they're designed to be addictive, there's the track record of successful action against tobacco firms, for example, on a similar basis. Look, finally, Hadley, before I let you go, Noel Gallagher is expected to win Songwriter of the Year at the upcoming Brit Awards, despite not having released any new music in the last year. This interests me enormously. It's caused a bit of a stir in the music world because many complaining about the lack of recognition for songwriters who actually have written and published songs recently. But it makes me think, Hadley, you or I, even if we stop writing columns, perhaps we could win Columnist of the Year. How do we go about this?
I mean, that would be amazing because I'm known as I'm known to myself, I should say, as a prize losing writer. So if maybe I need to stop writing and then I can start winning prizes. I am a lifelong hater of Oasis. I went through university in the late 90s, miserable because I had to hear Oasis everywhere. So none of this surprises me. It just compounds my idea that this country is insane when it comes to Oasis.
Hadley Freeman there, literally looking back in anger. Great. Hadley, lovely to speak to you as absolutely always. Take care. I will speak to you soon.